Thank you all for being here. We're very excited because our center has been focusing on bilingual science, and we've worked with our affiliated elementary schools. They've been teaching science and English for the third year right now, and we have a group of pre-service teachers that are currently taking 18 credit hours on top of their pre-service pre-service program requirements. And we have our first and second group of internship interns. Our first group is interning at different elementary schools now, and we have a second group who are currently supervised by Professor Tien and Professor Lin and Dr. Chen. For their internship, and their focus is on science. So we're very excited about this event. All right, so I will start my live streaming now. Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on teaching science in English. My name is Dr. Jane Jen, and I am the director of the Center for Research on Bilingual Education at National Taipei University of Education in Taiwan. This webinar was made possible by the cooperation between our center, the Ministry of Education in Taiwan, and Angeles University Foundation in the Philippines. I would like to acknowledge the attendance of our partners from Angeles University Foundations, Dr. Elvira Bolinas, Dean of the Graduate School. Dr. Bolinas, good morning.
Hi, hello, good morning.
Thank you. And today's speaker, Dr. Jarrent Tayag. Good morning, Dr. Tayag.
Good morning, Dr. Jane.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Dr. Jarrent Tayag is the faculty member of the Angeles University Foundation Graduate School. At present, he is the chairman of their university's graduate education program and undergraduate professional education department. He completed his Master's of Science in Chemistry at Anteno de Manila University and his Doctor of Philosophy major in Educational Management at Angeles University Foundation. He is currently pursuing another master's degree, Master in Distance Education at the University of the Philippines Open University. He is an item writing and item reviewing consultant for the Center of Educational Measurement Incorporated and an international peer reviewer of different educational research journals. He also served as a regional trainer for the K-12 science curriculum. He authored a number of research papers that have been published in international indexed journals. He served as panel member, resource person, facilitator, and collaborator for various professional development activities. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jarrent Tayag.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jane.
Okay. My pleasure. Thank you.
So let me just share my slides for this morning.
Sure.
Okay, I hope you do see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you very much. So first and foremost, I would like to thank you and your center for inviting me, as well as some of our colleagues to this webinar. Okay. So the topic for today's webinar is teaching science in English. So before that, some reminders for our participants. Okay, so may I request that all participants would mute your microphone during the presentation so as not to capture any background noise. And then you can also turn on your Google Meet's closed caption function and enable translation to Chinese so that it would aid you in following through the discussion for this webinar. Should you encounter any problem or should you have any concerns anytime during the session, please feel free to use the raise hand button. You can find it on the panel below your screen. So just hit that if you have some concerns. That's it, Dr. Jane. Thank you. Okay. One thing that I always do whenever I hold webinars is I always want to interact with the viewers, the participants, because I believe that there is a lot to learn from teachers or even from pre-service teachers. So every now and then, I'll be asking some questions, and I hope you could participate by typing your answers on the chat box. Don't worry, this is a safe space, okay? Feel free to answer questions the way you understand it, okay? So we are all learners in this world. That's something that all of us science teachers would understand. There are a lot of things that we will still be learning. So feel free to post your answers on the chat box. Let's start off with a check-in question, okay? Let's start off with the check-in question. What science topic do you love teaching? What science topic do you love teaching? Can you post your answers on the chat box? I am very, very interested to know what science topic do you love teaching? For the pre-service teachers, probably you can think about what science topic would you love to teach in the future? There, thank you, Dr. Jane. The water cycle, that's quite interesting. Okay, what about our other participants? I usually ask this question to science teachers because there I can see some answers. Thank you for those. States of matter. Wow, those are very nice topics. Anything related to biology, growth of a seed. Wow, thank you for that. That's a very interesting topic. For junior high school, the periodic table. Wow, challenging topic. Then we have plants, magnets, the elements, microbiology, plants, the animal life cycle, astronomy. Wow. My students would always have astronomy as one of their top topics in mind. They love talking about planets, they love talking about galaxies, the universe, and all. Okay, air, water, wind and air, energy, plant, solar system. Wow, we have a very diverse group right here, Dr. Jane. So I'm very happy to meet all of you. You know what? Your choice of topic kind of tell us what kind of a teacher you are, okay? Your inclination, right? So I can see the intermolecular forces of attraction. Wow, that's a big topic. Thank you very much for all of your responses. I really do appreciate your participation. So let me just share this with you. There was a survey conducted in a blog. So it's just a blog. It's not really something official, but it gives us a glimpse of what they're thinking of. The most popular science topics back in January of 2018. What do they love? What do probably the visitors of this particular website, what do they usually read about? So we have here a number of topics. So effects of temperature and pressure on state of matter, atoms and elements. I can see that on the chat box. Parts of a cell, the sun, moon, and stars, and the apparent motion of these celestial bodies. The role of sunlight and gravity in the water cycle. I've seen that topic also. Conservation of matter in chemical reaction. Temperature, thermal energy, and particle motion, weathering and erosion, sound waves, gene mutations. So these are just a few, okay? These are just a few of the topics that we cover whenever we teach science in different grade levels. Of course, there are some topics that are assigned in particular grade levels, okay? But the next question would be more interesting. Why do you love teaching that particular science topic? Why do you love teaching it? I tried to think about possible reasons. I posted here 6, okay? But if you have another reason, please feel free to post it on the chat box, okay? If you have another reason in mind why you think you love teaching that particular science topic, please feel free. But if your reason is among those that are listed, just write the number on the chat box. Oh, there, I can see one reason. Thank you for that. I can do demonstrations and relate them to daily life. That's a very good reason, okay? Okay, I can see trees. I can see one. It's fun and exciting. My students love this topic. Wow, that speaks a lot about you as a teacher. You really do consider your students, right? You really do consider your students. Okay, one, it's fun and exciting. Isn't it really that one of our goals as science teachers is to make our everyday lessons in science fun and exciting, apart from being meaningful, of course. And then I can see also those people who answered two. It is an important science topic. So there you are looking into the technicality of the sciences. If my students do not learn this, they might find difficulty learning the next lesson. I can see a four. Four, I know this topic very well. That is very true. Have you ever felt that whenever you know the topic very well, you get to be very, very excited teaching it, right? It's like there is no effort, okay? There is no effort necessary. It just comes out naturally. You just want to talk and design activities for your students because you know the topic very well, right? It is easy to let the students learning but understand the topic by learning by doing experiments. Very good. That's also nice. No, we try to look into how do we make our students experience, right? Experience a certain phenomenon. How do we make them see a certain phenomenon? How do we make them feel, right? Sometimes science teachers would feel that, oh, this topic is very difficult to teach because students cannot see it. For example, atoms and elements, right? Somebody posted atoms and elements a while ago. How do I make my high school students appreciate atoms where in fact they do not see an atom? Not unless you have sophisticated equipment or gadgets, right? Without making use of, let's say, a picture or a video, how would you make students realize that everything around them is actually made up of atoms, right? So these are just a few of the challenges that we usually experience. But the fact remains that we want to make our students as much as possible experience science, right? So thank you very much for those people who posted their answers. So I know you still have a lot of reasons in mind. So I want you to keep those reasons. I want you to keep those reasons. Hold on to them because whenever you get tired, okay? Whenever you get confused, whenever you get to be challenged, think about these reasons. You always go back to these reasons. Why do I want to do this? Okay, and then probably you would have a better motivation as to why you should continue doing what you are doing. Okay, so for this session, I only have two goals. Okay, two goals. The first one, I want you to reflect on your science teaching practices. What are you currently doing? Okay, what are you currently doing as a science teacher, as a pre-service science teacher, as an in-service science teacher, as somebody who is handling or supervising pre-service teachers? What are you currently doing? And see how we can further support our learners. Because at the end of the day, it's all about our learners, right? Why do you design all of these activities? Why do you take time reviewing your materials? Why do you take time attending these webinars? Deep within us, we have the desire to help our learners, right? We have the desire to make them better in terms of the knowledge, the skills, and even the kinds of attitudes that they have towards science at the very least. The second goal, identify strategies and practices in teaching science in English. Before I was part of the graduate school, I was able to handle elementary science classes as well as high school science classes. So I started teaching the grade 3 pupils, and then I was assigned also grade 4, grade 5, grade 6, grade 7, grade 8, grade 9, grade 10, up until senior high school. So I hope that I would be able to impart something that could be useful in whatever assignment you have. Okay, so these are the things that we will try to look at for the next few minutes that we'll be together. Okay, first and foremost, why do we teach science? Why do we teach science? We have to always go back to our goals, right? And we can have here a personal goal as a science teacher. There are also national goals. We also have institutional goals. The thing is, we have to understand why. Why do you want to teach science in English? Right? You have to understand. What I'm showing you right here is actually the goal of the science education in the Philippines under the K-12 program. I try to highlight important words, which I think are probably common, okay? Common for whichever institution or whichever country maybe we're looking into. So, science education aims to develop scientific literacy among learners that will prepare them to be informed and participative citizens. Let that sink in. We want our science students to be informed and participative citizens. Before you even think about how do I teach science? Do I teach it using English? Do I teach it using Mandarin? Do I teach it using another language? Before you even think about that, you always have to go back first. Why? Okay? What's your goal? Once your students are informed and informative, they would be able to make judgments and decisions. Make judgments and decisions. For what? For different things that would impact the social, health, and environmental aspects. We want them to contribute something to the society. Okay? We want them to come up with probably innovations. We want them to think about possible solutions to problems in our environment. Okay? We want them to direct their attention, okay, to those things that science could address. We want to develop that sort of way of thinking. Okay? We don't want citizens who are just making any kind of decisions. They have to be informed decisions. And this is a very big goal for us science teachers. So now think about your own personal or institutional or national science goal. And for the rest of this webinar, you always go back to that. You always go back to that. Because regardless of what kind of innovations you implement in the curriculum, if they do not address your goal, these would be useless. These would be indirected. Okay. So try to look at the next one. A lot of people are asking, whenever you tell them, oh, you should be teaching science in English, then comes the debate. But my students are already having difficulty understanding the content. If I would be asking them to make use of a foreign language to learn the content, wouldn't that even create more problems? As a science teacher, should I prioritize teaching the language or teaching the content? Which should we prioritize? A short answer, you are first and foremost a science teacher. You are first and foremost a science teacher. That means to say, you have to make sure that your students are hitting whatever target you have for the content. However, okay, So take note of the however. However, we have to understand that one of the critical aspects of science teaching is the inquiry process, right? We try to teach our students the process of inquiry. And in the process of inquiry, we have a cycle. We try to first encourage our students to ask questions. Ask questions. It all begins with a question. It all begins with a question that would spark the interest, the curiosity of our students. And then, once you have already sparked the curiosity of your students, you will guide them towards investigating the topic, investigating the question. You can have a multitude of strategies, of activities here, but the end goal is you are guiding the students to learn more, to explore deeper into the question that they have in mind. Next, you have to guide the students to process and analyze all of the information that they have. They might have gathered information through observations. They might have gathered information through experimentations, through interviews, through reading, through library work. The next step is to help them put together all of these information. Help them find patterns, right? Help them find similarities, differences, striking results, discrepancies maybe. You need to help them process and analyze. And then comes sharing of findings. What is the sense of getting a certain result if you are the only person who knows it? What is the sense of, let's say, this particular group of students knowing that this particular variable A, has a relationship with variable B, if they are the only ones who would know about this? In this particular stage, we ask our students, we let our students to communicate the results to their, at the very least, to their classmates, right? The students will stand in front and then tell you, okay, this is what we found out. We did this, we did this, we did this, and we found out that it's like this and like that. And then the next step is to evaluate, reflect, and evaluate on the result. Does it really make sense? How can we make use of this? What do we do after this? We try to reflect. We guide our students to reflect on the entire process. Did I learn something out of the entire process? Is there a question in my head that came about as a part of the results? That sparks another cycle. Remember, I would always be reminded of a quotation. I think it was George Bernard Shaw. Science that does not solve a problem without creating 10 more problems. Science does not solve a problem without creating 10 more problems. In the process of knowing, in the process of getting results, we begin to ask more questions. And that is actually the start of an endless cycle of inquiry. That is the start of an endless cycle of curiosity from among our students. Now, looking back at the entire inquiry process, you would see that language is a critical part. Asking questions. You need to master the language, right? Gathering data, gathering references. You need to know the language, right? You are communicating results. You need to have a certain level of competence in terms of the language being used. Language is a critical part of the process. That's why if we try to go back to the question a while ago, do we prioritize language or the content? Yes, you are a science teacher, but you have to understand that language is a critical part. Not only probably of science, but of teaching in general. Language is a critical part of our way to communicate, our way to interact, our way to exchange ideas, right? Now, why do we teach science in English? Why are we pushing forward to teaching science in English? Just like what I mentioned a while ago, I had experience handling courses in the elementary and high school. There was a time, or there were several years, that in my class, I had, apart from Filipino students, I also have German students, I also have Japanese students, there were Korean students, there were also Chinese students in the class. So, thinking about that, using English as a medium of instruction for the discussion part, for all the materials that we use, using English provided a common language for all of us. If we will be using Filipino, which is the common language for the Filipino learners, those students who do not know the Filipino language might be alienated. They will not be able to participate. If my students will not speak in English, they will not be understood by the other members of the class, right? Why English? It's a common language. It's a common language for people who are coming from different countries. When you put them all together in one classroom, it's very difficult. It's challenging to come up with a common language. And English gives us one. Okay? So this is the first one. It facilitates exchanges of ideas between and among students of different nationalities. I would always appreciate the ideas coming from the Chinese students, because they have a different background. They have a different context. The background coming from the Japanese students, their perspectives are gold. The background coming from the Koreans, from other nationalities. My students, the learners in the classroom, are learning from each other because of these exchanges. And using English as a common language for the discussion allows them to have a common means of interacting. If they would be making use of another language, they will not be able to understand one another. This is one of the primary reasons why we really push forward teaching science in English. Most of the available resources, not only in our country, but even outside the country, international resources are in English. For example, if I ask my students to read a journal, a research journal, and I ask them to go to a certain database, I doubt if they would find a database housing Filipino research articles. I doubt if they would be able to find a number of, let's say, video materials, even in YouTube or other streaming sites, that are made in Filipino. Most of the materials available are in English. And it would be quite challenging if I would just be requiring the students, oh, you just use Filipino references. You just use this kind of references. Because we have to understand that one of the goals, remember our goal, the goal that I posted in the beginning of this webinar, our goal is to make our students informed citizens. And how do we make them informed citizens? We make them part of the international community. We make them participate in the discourse, in the interactions of the international community. And how is that possible? By making them read articles that are talking about issues and concerns, not only within the country, but even those outside the country. There are even some activities in which I would require the students to look at the video and then respond to it, comment, post a comment. And then some other people from other countries who may also be students, they would also be posting their comments, replying to the comment of my student. See, think about it. If they posted in Filipino, okay, if they posted a comment in Filipino, probably only the Filipinos would respond. But this is an international platform, meaning to say people from different nationalities or different countries are also viewing this. They would be interested. They would be interested to exchange ideas with you. If and only if they would understand what you're talking about, right? So that's another. Student collaboration is made possible through efficient communication. We know that. In our classrooms, if ever we want to advocate learning-centered and learner-centered education, we always look into providing opportunities for our students to work together, to be part of a team, right? Especially if they're doing some experiments, we want them to work together. Because in reality, we really cannot work alone. We do not work alone, right? Collaboration is a life skill that our students must learn as early as possible. But the question remains, what about language barrier? Our students are not used to speaking in English. They're not used to writing in English. They're not used to using English as a form of communication, let's say during the discussion. They find it difficult. That's just normal. No one is probably, not unless you're a natural speaker of English, you should be able to really have this high level of competence in the language. But for us who are not natural speakers of English, we really have to exert some sort of effort. So we all begin at that beginning level. So whenever you feel that, oh my goodness, I do not know this, I can't understand it, you're not alone. You're not alone. But we have to begin somewhere. We have to begin somewhere. So let's talk about this language barrier. How do we try to address it? Okay, the first question is, how do we equip our learners with the adequate language competence to participate in our classes? If we try to look at it, different grade levels may require different levels of language competence, right? They would require different levels of language competence. You don't expect, for example, a grade 3 pupil to be very fluent in the language, right? So you do not put such expectations. You have to understand that in various levels, there's also increasing level of competence in the language, particularly in English. So this is my proposal on how we can actually create scaffolds, okay? Create support for our learners in learning science in English. The very first one, try to look at your curriculum. Try to review your curriculum. Okay? Once you have seen your curriculum, you would also understand the different needs. The different needs in terms of the content, of course, that's a primary consideration. What content do you need to teach? Second, what language structures need to be mastered by the students alongside with the content? What language structures need to be mastered? At what level of confidence should they be communicating? Let's try to look at an example. In the Philippines, when they try to develop the K to 12 science curriculum, for the first two grade levels, grades 1 and grade 2, there is no separate science subject. Yes, I agree. Scaffolding is very important. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for affirming that. There are no science subjects for the primary grades. Grades 1 and 2, science topics are embedded, integrated, okay, within the language subjects. How is that possible? Whenever they have activities in, let's say, the English class, they make use of body parts. They speak of body parts. In fact, in the Philippines, one of the first songs that little kids would learn is a song about the body parts. I do not know if you're familiar with the song. Even if they're not yet in school, their parents would teach those songs. For example, my toes, my knees, my shoulder, my head, my toes, my knees, my shoulder, my head. That's the entry point. We might just be thinking about, oh, that's very common, but that's an entry point, right? Because the moment they go to school, they already know these names, the names of these body parts, which are already in English. And that enables the student to participate into the discussion. When the teacher says, okay, can you show me your head? Can you point your head? The student becomes, okay, I can see some comments right there. We sing the water cycle song and science songs. Those are very, very effective, right? It basically introduces some terms to the students. And you know what? Don't you feel confident whenever your teacher mentions a term that you are familiar with? Okay? When your teacher mentions a term that you are familiar with, you become confident. Oh, I am part of this class. Oh, I know that word. I know that word. Teacher, is this that part? That is the start of engagement for our students. Remember, there is fear whenever we talk about language barrier. Thank you for sharing that link. I hope I'll copy that and see if I can also suggest it with our teachers. Appreciate that. You see, whenever students listen to the teacher and they do not recall, they do not understand the words coming out of the teacher, they develop fear. I don't understand what my teacher is talking about. I want to ask a question, but I don't know if this is what they are talking about. I want to participate. I want to answer the question of my teacher, but I'm not sure if I understood them right. You see, whenever students feel that is a part of the language barrier that we're talking about. In the curriculum, science subject starts in grade 3. Probably, the assumption is that by grade 3, they might have already gained a number of the science vocabularies to give them a good start to understand now deeper processes. For example, you're talking about push and pull, right? When you talk about push and pull, you're talking about nouns. Push the table, pull the string. Table and string, during the primary years, these are just nouns. They talk about these things as nouns. But come grade 3, come grade 4, grade 5, grade 6, table and strings are not just nouns. They become matter. We discuss
phases, states of matter. Imagine if, for example, you would be teaching matter and students do not even know, let's say, tables and strings. Oh, this is a table? I don't know. I didn't know you call this a table. Oh, is this a string? I didn't know that this is a string. Familiarization. There is now a deeper, you now go deeper because you know that your students already have a certain level of foundation. They already have a certain level of foundation. If they don't have this foundation, it is very difficult. It is very difficult to teach the succeeding lessons. Okay? Much more when they go to the higher levels. Because in the junior high school, you don't just teach processes or relationships. You now teach them inquiry skills, how to design their own experiments, how to make systematic analysis of observations that they had, how to process the data that they have gathered. Imagine the challenge if the students do not have an understanding of the first few basic words, and you will be giving them an assignment, say, okay, I want you to go to this research database, get one research article, read it, and I want you to tell something about it tomorrow. If this is the first time that they would be reading that article and they don't know at least the basic English words, it would take a lot of time. It might even frustrate our students because they don't understand what's happening. They don't understand what's this. We have to also understand that research articles in themselves have inherent difficulties. There, thank you very much for all of those songs. Wonderful. Academic papers, when you try to read them, they have inherent difficulties. They have their own language. Okay? That is why it's very important to expose our students to all of these reading materials as early as possible. But of course, we consider that their development level. It would be unfair and absurd if you will be giving a high school material to a grade 3 pupil, right? So you have to also consider the level of difficulty. So this is one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, what kind of skills are you trying to develop? What kind of skills are you trying to develop? In this slide, I am showing you the progression of skills, the progression of scientific skills across the different key stages in the K-12 program. So we have 4 key stages in the basic education. So the first key stage is basically the primary level stage, starting from the kindergarten up to grade 3. So by grade 3, they should have achieved these particular skills: observing, communicating, comparing, classifying, measuring, predicting, but of course, within their level. Think about it. How come these are the skills that need to be developed? Observing. Okay, class, what's the color of this box? What's the color of this ball? How would your students answer? So they might tell you, oh, it's red. It's an adjective, right? It's an adjective. It's a color. Oh, it's a big ball. They're observing the size. Oh, it's rough. This object is rough. You're again talking about an adjective. Adjectives that are integrated or primarily discussed in their language classes, not necessarily in their science classes. Okay? But if you try to think about it, you are giving the students an entry point. You are giving the students an entry point to learning science in English in the upper grade levels. Because when they go to grades 4 to 6, okay, I'll address that later. Thank you very much. Oh, I can see you shared FET Colorado. That's a very good source for simulations. Okay, for grades 4 to 6, they would be assigned to design simple investigations using appropriate procedures. Simple investigations. Okay. In here, you can provide them easy to read materials because you have to understand their background. Remember what they learned in the primary level. They might just have learned simple words, right? They might have just learned how to construct simple sentences. So you have to consider that. Do not give them very difficult reading materials at this particular level. Do not give them very long reading materials at this level. Why? You will be frustrating the students, the learners. You will be frustrating them. Okay? So, support them. Support them. I have seen a lot of experiment materials in which there's very few text. Yeah, sure. There's very few text, but there's a lot of diagrams and images. These diagrams and images can actually give cues to the students. This is what we mean by scaffolds and support. Again, do not expect your learners, especially if you are just starting to teach science in English. Right. If you are just starting to teach science in English, especially for the lower grades, do not expect them to read lengthy English reading materials. Start with simple ones, a lot of diagrams so that they can associate the text to the diagram. Right? Adopt or paraphrase. That's a very good practice. Okay? So put those diagrams after the text or before the text, and they would see, oh, this is what it means. Oh, this is what I should do. Right? But in that process, you are encouraging them to read the material. The key is exposure. We need to exposure. We need to expose our students. We need to expose our students to these different reading materials. They need to love them. Okay, by grade 7 to 10, this is what we call the junior high school. They should have developed scientific, technological, and environmental literacy. Quite big. It's a big goal, right? It's a big goal. Because the assumption here is that you have already provided sufficient support, adequate support in the lower grade levels that now your students can start learning more complicated materials, more complex materials. But these materials are directed. Of course, we don't forget the content. They are directed towards mastering the contents that you have. By grades 11 and 12, this is already the senior high school level, they should have already gained the skills to obtain scientific and technological information from varied sources about global issues. Now, you are expanding the perspectives of your students. You are expanding the perspectives of your students. You are introducing them to the world of information, to the world of ideas, to a bigger arena of communication, of scientific communication. The thing that I want you to appreciate on this slide is the provision of scaffolds within the curriculum itself. Within the curriculum itself. Because we have to understand that Teaching science in English is not just the job of one teacher. Okay? It's not the job of, let's say, it's not the job of the grade 7 teacher alone. You need the help of the entire teaching force from the beginning up until the end. There must be consistency of support and consistency of exposure. So some questions to ponder. So I want you to think about these questions. First, when you try to think about your science curriculum, think about what level of English language competence is required to efficiently deliver your lesson. Say, you are teaching in the junior high school level or in the secondary level. What do you think should be the English language competence of your students? I understand that this may be an innovation that you're trying to implement. So consider that as well. It might be best to consider that your students are at the beginning level. Consider the taxonomy of educational objectives. You might be asking too much from your students. Think about it. If the objective is for the students to simply, at least for this level, they're simply supposed to identify, let's say, the parts of a cell. Focus on that. There may be a reason why is that the objective. Probably the reason is for them to master first the terms. Be familiar with the language first. So do not ask the students yet to discuss or explain. Not yet. Let them familiarize themselves first on that level. And then gradually support them. Gradually provide them with activities that would enable them to use these terms now to explain, discuss, describe, compare, up to the point that they can actually create something innovative out of all these things that they have learned. Think about how you develop your lesson. Another thing to think about, has the previous grade levels provided enough support for learners to engage into the activities? Has the previous grade level provided enough support for learners to engage into the activities? A while ago, I showed you the roadmap of the curriculum. What if that those particular language structures were not thoroughly discussed in the previous grade level? What should you do? Okay, I'll answer that later on. Thank you for that question. Provide them with activities that would enable them to learn first the prerequisite skills. This is commonly an issue. This is commonly an issue because sometimes we as science teachers, we have assigned topics, right? For example, within this year, I have to discuss this. But I later found out that my students have not mastered yet some competencies from the previous grade level. What do I do? If we try to go back to the goal of science education, we would understand that we have to go back. There is no other choice. We have to go back. We have to go back because without understanding the foundations, if they don't understand the foundations, it will be very difficult for our students to learn whatever you will be teaching them right now. Okay? What's the sense of asking the students to read this if they cannot even understand it, simply because they were not given this level of language structures. They were not given lessons on these language structures. They were not given opportunities to learn these words. Okay? So do not only consider the content, but consider the language as well. That's a very good point. I can see there in Taiwan, our curriculum is spiraled so that concepts are recycled again and again. The same thing in the Philippines. So they try to um, repeat the lesson, the topic with increasing complexity. Okay, with increasing complexity. I'll share more about this later on. I'll answer that question on the next, probably on the next slide. How does your selection of student activities and teaching strategies encourage learners to participate? I'm going to answer that question on the next slide once I get into this. You see, sometimes, or most of the time, our students are knowledgeable of the content. They know the answer. But if they're not confident with the language, how can they participate? They know the answer, but they don't know how to say it. Okay? So you have to consider, what kind of activities are you providing? What kind of teaching strategies are you using? So let's now go on to teaching strategies. The second step, after looking at your curriculum, you also have to rethink of your teaching strategies. How do you structure your class? A while ago, we were looking at the curriculum, and that's a big work. That's a big work. You need all of your teachers in the school to work on that. But in this stage, you're on your own. What kind of strategies will support your students towards learning science in English? True or false? Your answer on the chat box, please. True or false? In a learner-centered class, teachers want to hear learners express their ideas about the topic being discussed. True or false? Can you post your answer on the chat box? There. Thank you very much for that. Okay. There. Oh, it seems that we all agree, right? Thank you very much. So at least I know you're still there. By the way, I would like to really appreciate you for being so participative in our webinar. It tells me that I am not alone. Thank you very much. So of course, it's true. We want to hear the ideas of our learners. We want to hear it from them. We want them to share, right? What they have read, what they have watched, what they have heard, what they have learned from, let's say, their parents, their classmates, right? So that's a learner-centered class. Thank you very much for those who participated. Okay, if we want to hear our learners, how do we make them confident with their language? This is a common concern, right? How do we make them confident? The key is giving time. The key is giving time. Think about why you are able to participate today whenever I ask questions. Think about that. How come I am speaking in English? Maybe some of you are not that confident with their language, with their English competence level or mastery. But here you are answering my questions. Here you are giving your responses. You see that? Why? Because I am giving you time. I give pauses. I'm giving you thinking time. Okay? In our classroom, how do we do that? How do we give time? Can the students share their answers in their mother languages? Yeah, it's okay. I'll, I'll, I'll share an experience on that. In our class, we use English to discuss. But what if a student would answer in Filipino? That's just fine. But the teacher would respond in English. And eventually, the student would understand that, oh, they're speaking in English. They're speaking in English. And then eventually they would also do that. It's about creating an atmosphere, creating an environment. Okay, okay, that's correct. That's correct. Thank you for that, Juby. How do we provide scaffolding? This is how. First, read and understand prompts. Okay, I'll give details to this later on. This is to answer the scaffolds that you're asking a while ago. So give time. Read and understand prompts. Second, give students time to write down their thoughts. Give students time to write down their thoughts. One of the first exercises or activities that I give my class to basically know their level of English competence is to ask them at the first day of my class, I ask them to write down their expectations in English. Write down their expectations. What do they expect in the class? The topic is in science, but they're using English as the language to express their thoughts. Listen to the teacher, other learners, or other experts. And then finally, give time for students to speak their minds. Now, let me elaborate each of the bullets. First, read and understand prompts. This is a suggestion that I would be giving to you. I have tried this with some of my foreign students, and it works. Give the reading materials about the lesson before the actual class. Give them time to review the materials on their own. Give them the resources that they need to read. It's a best practice to come up with a calendar of activities. For example, this is a routine that I usually have. On the last day of the week, say Friday or probably Thursday, I will send out the materials that need to be read, studied by the students for the next week. Okay? Or if you can give more time for the students, better. Ask them to read the materials. But again, just a reminder, make sure that it is within their language ability, within their language competence. If you think, even if they're already in high school, if you think that this is just their level, look for materials within that level. Sir, we don't have existing materials. Now, that's the challenge. Probably, it is time for you to come up with one. In our public school, they have what we call strategic intervention materials. Strategic intervention materials. Because sometimes they would notice that there are students within their class that are still lagging behind. Okay? They are not within the expected level. So teachers would come up with instructional materials that they can provide the students so that they can eventually catch up. That is one very, very effective scaffold. Because if we ignore these students, they would just continue to lag behind. Come up with materials that would address specific needs of your learners in your classrooms and give time for your students to read them and understand them. Another scaffold that you can do, if you have the reading material, put emphasis on words or phrases that students may find difficulty with. So, you have this reading material. Okay, I have a reading material for my lesson next week. Read it. If you find words that, oh, I think my students would have difficulty understanding this word, put an emphasis to it. You can highlight it. You can use a bold face on it. You can underline it just to give emphasis. You can even provide the meaning of the word if it's necessary. Or you can encourage your students to look up the meaning of that word in the dictionary. Again, give time. Give time for your students to understand the material. Now, what about writing down their thoughts? How do we make scaffolds? First, this is also very effective. Once they are reading the material, you can ask them to come up with an outline. Come up with an outline. What is this reading material all about? It may be just phrases, it may be bullets, maybe short paragraphs, whichever works. They can put marks on the reading materials. I have some students who really love, who would still love, okay, printing out the reading material and then jotting notes. Okay, I experienced the same thing. Whenever you're reading very complicated research articles, for example, I would put down notes. There's an unfamiliar word, a technical term. I usually encircle it, then put the meaning. So you see, it does not only happen to our basic education students. It may also happen to us. And it is a good practice if we could actually teach our students note-taking skills. You can even include in your activities in the class, or even before the class, drawing mind maps. Okay, drawing mind maps. The good thing about mind maps is that you can immediately see if there are some sort of misconceptions about the things that they have read. For example, if they have drawn a line and the line is not supposed to be there, the line is not supposed to be there, you would have an idea that, oh, perhaps they did not understand this part of the reading material. Okay? This would enable you to check comprehension. Required to learn 360 words. Okay, those are your sight words. Next. Teach the learners to keep a vocabulary book. It helps. In some of our grade levels, some teachers would even require students to list down difficult words and then, right, thank you. Okay, list down difficult words and their meanings so that students could easily look up on these words using their book. So this is another, definitely keep a vocabulary book. Thank you for affirming that. Yeah, a vocabulary book would help depending on the level. There was even a practice before, but this is, yeah, I also saw some of the science teachers doing this. In their classes, they have a corner on the board wherein they have a word for the day. Maybe you could come up with a science word for the day, or even just in a simple English word for the day. And then they would ask the student to use the word in a sentence. Okay? So these are some of the practices that you could probably explore. Start an asynchronous discussion forum to allow learners to discuss the materials even before the class. I also find this very effective. Okay? Let's say you have given the reading materials to the students, create a discussion forum. If you have a learning management system, it's very easy to come up with the discussion forum. You can see their students talking about this particular paragraph, and then another student supporting, I did not understand what this sentence means. And then another student will comment, I think this sentence means like this. I did not understand paragraph number 2. And then a student would respond. So they're talking about science, they're talking about the content, but they're also practicing the language. A discussion forum used at the elementary level, I think in the probably higher elementary grades, depending probably on the structure of the forum. But this works At least in my experience, it works well for the junior high school group, senior high school, and even for college. Okay? Listen to the teacher, other learners, and other experts. This is also another effective strategy that we've tried. Assign the reading materials in pairs or in groups. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the jigsaw method. It's a very nice strategy or method in which learners would study a particular material and then share it with other. There, they love jigsaw, isn't it? You're integrating the idea of accountability in the process. You're including accountability. If I do not study this material well, I cannot teach it. I cannot help my group mates. Therefore, I need to really listen to others, to this expert group. I need to listen to this expert group. I need to talk with them, okay, to understand it. Think, pair, and share is also a very nice activity. So they would read the reading material together. They would read the reading material alone. Then they would share the student. Oh, they didn't. Okay, they do not. Then they would pair up, talk about the material perhaps, and then share it. Share it with the class. Okay, in Taiwan, we don't engage students so much in reading science texts. Oh, I see. Okay. Teach the learners how to use meta cards. Now, if you are not yet confident in asking the students to really read a lot of science texts, maybe you could start with some words or phrases and let them work with these words, right? Start with that, okay? Start with meta cards. You can see here how they would understand. Meta cards are basically pieces of paper where students could put down their thoughts. Say, for example, at the beginning of the class, you would ask them, okay, what do you know about, let's say, photosynthesis? What do you know about photosynthesis? And then students would have their cards and they would write a phrase, okay? A phrase on those cards. And then they could actually discuss those phrases, or they can post those cards on the board, okay? This way, the teacher can check, oh, this is what they know. Or the teacher can also ask the students to synthesize the information based on those cards. Those are meta cards that we use. Or this is another effective way to do it. Design. Yeah, that's it. Design interview assignments, which will require them to talk to an English-speaking individual. I did this in some of my classes. They were able to interview a scientist. They were able to interview a scientist. They were able to interview doctors, but they are put in a situation wherein they have no other choice but to speak in English, because the person that they're interviewing does not understand any other language but English. Okay, so you could probably design such activities so that students would also understand that there is a need. There is a need for them to learn this particular language. And then speak their minds. Give time for students to speak their minds. Include in the class a routine. I did this when I was handling basic education. Include in the class routine a portion where a learner will share to the class a science article that they read, or probably a science news that they heard, but in English. Okay? Probably something that, a science news that they have seen in a streaming site. Just share it. In this way, all the students would have the opportunity to stand in front and maybe tell about this particular story in their own language, in the English language. This may take up like around 5 minutes of the first part of your lesson. It's just giving opportunities for students to practice. It's all about practice. Give opportunities for students to practice. Include a vocabulary unlocking activity at the start of the lesson. Vocabulary unlocking activity. It could be a game. Students love games, right? Student love games. It may be like a game show, okay? But in that game show, they are actually like defining terms. Instead of just giving them pre-tests, for example, you can turn it into a game. Okay? So include a vocabulary unlocking activity or puzzles to solve, just to expose them with those terminologies or phrases. Design activities that will provide opportunities for learners to talk about their ideas. Maybe engage them in debates, panel discussions, reporting of experiments, experiment results. Okay? So again, it's all about giving opportunities for students, giving opportunities to students to speak their minds. This is also very important. Whenever you do this, all of these activities, all of these strategies, create a safe space for learning. Again, create a safe space for learning. We do not want students teasing other students who are not very good with the language. So probably you could have an agreement with the students. Okay? We will all try to speak in English, but if somebody commits an error, nobody should make fun of this person because it's a safe space. It's okay to commit errors because it's a school, it's a classroom. Okay? Filipinos are quite particular. Filipino students are quite particular with this. That's why we usually ask them not to make fun of students who are committing, let's say, grammatical errors or mispronunciations. So please create a safe space for learning. What about this? I have a few learners who are really having difficulty using the English language. Can I use differentiated instruction? The short answer, yes. How? Number one, think about your learners. It's differentiated because your learners have different needs. They might have different skills. They might have different background information. They might have different competence in terms of the language. And that's a challenge for you. How do you provide them with developmentally appropriate materials so that they would still be able to learn? They would still be able to learn the topic or the concept or the skill that you're trying to teach. Now, you really have to work together as a team within your school, within your grade level, to look into your existing learning materials. Are they within our the abilities of our students? Not only in terms of the content, because a while ago I read that a lot of the students already have content expertise. They know the content already. Now, probably you can direct your attention to the language. How can we make this more manageable for our students? Refer to multimedia modalities. I saw this also on the chat box a while ago, using different modalities or introductory materials. In my chemistry class, whenever students find it difficult to understand the text, okay? Sometimes it really is a challenge to understand chemistry textbooks, especially those written in English. What they usually do is they go to YouTube. There's a channel there which is Crash Course. It basically provides a very easy to understand explanation of different topics. I'm not sure if you know this particular site. It can actually discuss, let's say, the atomic theory in 10 minutes. There are a lot of animations and it's in English. There are subtitles. Okay, you can easily follow it, and they make the discussion very animated. So my students will first view it there so that they could grasp, okay, foundational knowledge. And then they will go back to the text, to the reading material. And it would be somehow easier for them to understand. It will be easier for them to understand the text because now they have a background. The point here is we try to explore different modalities. Try to explore different modalities. Another, you can also try peer tutoring. So in one of your classroom activities, maybe you could ask a student who has higher language competence to be paired with somebody who is quite challenged in terms of the language, and they would help each other. Okay, sometimes there's a benefit. Okay, there's an advantage when another student is discussing the topic to another student, right? So maybe it could work. So you see here, there are different strategies that we can play along in order to, once again, expose our students to the language. And then another part of the roadmap, we also have to rethink our assessment strategies. How do we assess our learners? We ask them to do this and that during the discussion. We ask them to come up with this project, okay? To read this material, to interview this person. But how do we assess them? Maximize formative assessments. Maximize formative assessments. So I'm just borrowing a definition here, but the essence is that formative assessments is an ongoing process. It's an ongoing process, and during this time, they would be able to the teacher would be able to elicit and use evidence of student learning to improve student understanding of intended disciplinary learning outcomes. The goal is to make the learner self-directed. The goal is to make the learner self-directed. Formative assessment can happen anytime during the learning process. Okay? If you ask the student a question and they would respond, okay, that is a way by which you could check, did they really understand what I was talking about? Did they really understand the content? Okay? So some of the things that we have to remember for formative assessment, we can actually clarify learning goals and success criteria within a broader progression of learning. A while ago, I introduced to you the curriculum. Okay? The curriculum is right there. And what happens there is they try to look into what kind of assessment can I use in order to check whether they achieved the targets from the previous level or from the previous topic. Eliciting and analyzing evidence of student thinking. Eliciting and analyzing evidence of student thinking. What are my students thinking? Looking into their metacognition. Engaging in self-assessment and peer feedback. Providing actionable feedback. How do you address the needs of your learners? Do you change the strategies? Okay? Do you proceed? Do you ask the students to redo their assignment? Using evidence and feedback to move learning forward. Again, it goes back to scaffolding. Consider the following when designing assessment activities. When formulating questions, use simple English words, especially if you're dealing with a cognitively demanding concept. The concept is already difficult, okay? The concept is already difficult, so allow the students to make use of simpler words, okay, to explain, to understand the topic. When designing test items, for example, use words that have been used in the class during the discussion. Do not use words that the learners are not familiar with. Because if you do that, this will just encourage the students to simply guess. I don't understand what this word means. So how can I answer this question? So I'll just be guessing. When necessary and appropriate, provide additional stimuli to aid the material. For example, you can give them graphs, diagrams, or images. Okay? Could you provide different forms of formative assessment you use for elementary school students? Okay, for different formative assessments, it depends on the goal. So some of the teachers would use games to look at prior knowledge of students. Okay, they use games. They also ask students to draw. Since elementary kids love arts a lot, they can actually draw. They are actually asked to do group activities. They are also asked to do experimentations. Sometimes they are asked to go outside the classroom, do their observations of, let's say, the garden, and write down some notes. Okay, so in other cases, of course, the always available question and answer activities. Okay, so those are just some of the formative assessments that they do. They can happen anytime during the lesson. Before administering a test, take it first and mark words or phrases that students may find difficult to understand. This is the same suggestion that I had a while ago for reading materials. Try to look at the reading material and check, will this word be difficult to understand for my students? If you put it in your examination, you ask yourself, is this really the best way to ask this item, or can I even simplify it? If you would notice, I am always inviting you to look back, reflect. Okay? You have these materials already, look back. Since you have this goal in mind right now, just check whether they align now with the current goal that you have. I'll try to address the other question, the lengthy questions on the chat box after the talk, okay? And then finally, as science teachers, we need to continue learning across the roadmap, okay? Yes, you have done curricular review, you have done review of your teaching strategies, you have done review of your assessment strategies, but it does not end there. And that is the reason why we need to appreciate professional learning communities. Probably within your schools, you have your professional learning communities. Maybe this is a group of science teachers handling the same grade level. You can talk and check, discuss what kind of material should be produced, what kind of assessment should we come up with. Okay? Talk about your experiences. Talk about the response of your students when you use this particular material to them. Talk about how your students participated when you made use of this activity. Start crafting your own instructional materials in English. Start crafting your own instructional materials in English. There, thank you for sharing those as well. The good thing about crafting your own instructional materials is that you can adjust them, you can calibrate them to the levels of your learners. And you are also considering the context and culture of your learners, okay? Next, this is one thing that I commend all of you, attending professional learning activities such as this, okay? I do appreciate all of those comments, sharings that you have on the chat box, because this is an example of how professional learning activities should be. They should be exchanges of ideas, okay? This is supposed to be exchanges of ideas, especially for us who are coming from different cultural backgrounds, different educational systems, perhaps, right? So we are learning with each other. And then be open for discussions with your colleagues and your learners. Be open for discussions with your colleagues and your learners. Do not get offended whenever your colleagues will tell you, I think this will be more effective. I think we can try this. I don't think you were able to engage your students with this strategy. It's all about being open to suggestions and looking at results, okay? The use of the English language provides us with a wider arena to have an exchange of ideas, because just like what I mentioned at the first few minutes of this webinar, a lot of the materials in the international arena are in English. And we don't want to deprive our learners of this kind of resources. If our goal is to make our students informed, okay, informed citizens, able to participate in nation building, become innovative citizens, if that is our goal, we want them to be scientifically literate, come up with solutions to the problems that we are encountering through science. We need to provide our students with the skills, okay, to partake, to tap on all of these resources. You also have to understand that once students have already tapped on these sources, there's another challenge. Because not everything that we find in the internet is correct and accurate. So the second challenge is, how do we make them critical about this information? Perhaps the start is, again, exposing them to the kind of materials that, at least for our standards, are appropriate for them and would help them reach the level that they have to be. Okay? So let me just go through the chat box so that I can respond some of the questions that you have before I end my slides. Okay, according to the Philippines mother tongue-based multilingual education policy, mother tongues of the children should be used as instructional language for K to grade 3 students. And then from grade 4 to grade 6, the instructional language will be gradually transferred to Filipino in English. Literature reported it's very challenging for teachers, but I would like to learn from Dr. Tayag in person. How do K to grade 3 Filipino teachers react to this government requirement in terms of their teaching? Okay, that's a very good question. Indeed, for the first few levels, they are encouraging mother tongue. But just like what I mentioned a while ago, they are also teaching English eventually. And in the process, they are integrating some of these science terms. The thing is, you have to consider in which community are you actually teaching. Because if you speak of, let's say, urban communities, at least in the Philippines, many of the students are familiar with the English language, probably because of their exposure to the media, okay? Exposure to the media, exposure of available resources, sometimes even at home. In fact, in our university, we actually teach English as early as grade 1, because apparently after doing a survey, the administration found out that most of the students actually use English even in their household. So the idea here is to look at the context in which the school is actually situated. So when we speak of the mother tongue, it does not really have to be sometimes a dialect. Sometimes it's more efficient if you make use of the Filipino language, because in a heterogeneous class wherein you have, let's say, Cebuanos, you have Kapampangans, you have Tagalogs, it might be more efficient if you make use of a dominant language. Okay? And then there are also initiatives. For example, in our university, since we are a center of excellence in teacher education, we have already initiated some actions on developing materials that would cater to the mother tongue of the students. I guess it all boils down to the idea of, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? We want to help our students. We want to make them master the competency as much as possible. But at the same time, we also want them to master the language eventually. Gradually, perhaps. We want them to master the language gradually. And just like what I would repeatedly mention in this session, it's all about a matter of exposure. I'm not sure about the extent of exposure of Taiwanese students towards the English language, but in the Philippines, a lot of parents would expose their kids or their children to English language material, say for example videos, English movies, as early as, I don't know, 2 years old, 3 years old. That's why the moment they get into kindergarten, the English language is not really something alien to them, something peculiar for them. Okay, I hope I answered that question. And then let's try to look at some other questions. Dr. Chen, if I missed out a question, perhaps you could remind me. And then here, how do we provide scaffolding? I hope, yes, Dr. Chen. Okay. How do you
Yes, go
provide
ahead with how do
scaffolding?
you
Okay,
provide
you try to
scaffolding?
look at your students, look at their difficulties, and then provide necessary activities or necessary materials based on their level. For example, in my experience, I once had a student who really had difficulty expressing himself in English. How did I know? During the first activity that I had, in which I asked them to write down their expectation, I could barely understand what he wrote. I could barely what was he trying to tell me. Okay, so from there on, I knew that his level of language competence might not be really similar to the other members of the class. So what I did is I talk to the student, and I usually give him the materials ahead of time. Okay, sometimes I would even give him some notes. For example, okay, try to for this particular part, try to look at page 14 of the textbook. If you still have difficulty, try asking me. Okay, so you have to know first the level of your students, and then from there on, once you know their needs, try to understand what kind of activities will help them, okay, develop the target competencies. It may be an activity, it may be a reading material, just like my example a while ago. You could come up with personalized materials that students could actually use. Or maybe you could, this is another effective strategy, you could ask them to go to a particular website so that they could read more about it, and like that.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to ask if the audience would like to take the mic and ask the questions,
Sure.
so we could hear your voices and be more interactive.
Yeah. Thank you very much for all of those questions. I really love that the chat box was very active and alive.
Yes, Professor Tien.
Yes, thank you for having this wonderful webinar. And I still have that question that I raised, Dr. Tayag. If all children's English are, very good as you just described, then isn't it interesting that the government insisted that teachers use mother tongue as the instructional language for kindergarten to the 3rd grade?
Okay, that's an interesting question. There could be several reasons. Number one, they're trying to promote the use of the mother tongue language, because we know for a fact that the Philippines has a lot of different languages, different culture, different groups. Okay, so one reason is that they would like to maintain the identity of these groups. Okay, that's one. Second, there is the belief that if the student would make use of the mother tongue as an entry point for their education, it's a lot easier for them to understand the language, the lessons. Okay. Consequently, in some schools, in some areas, just like what I mentioned a while ago, for example, in urban areas in the Philippines, English is already the language that they're using in school. So when the government imposed the idea of, okay, use the mother tongue, there are some schools that actually follow the idea, in the sense that they use English as the mother tongue of the students. In some cases, for example, in the rural areas, for example, you are the mother tongue is, let's say, Cebuano, okay, they would really have to make use of Cebuano because that is the more familiar language for the learners. It's a very good entry point. In our case, for example, we live in Pampanga, so the group is we are part of the Kapampangan group. We do not have so, I'm not sure of the number, but as far as I know, many of our schools would still use English as an entry point because, just like what I mentioned, this is the exposure of many of the students. I hope I answered your question, Dr. Tien.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Tayag. This is a very informative talk, and I think I was commenting in the chat so that I was reflecting on your talk while as you speak, and so you've introduced a lot of reading in the Philippines for the students, and the difference between Taiwan and Philippines is that the students' English proficiency level is a little bit low here because we are in our infancy level of introducing bilingual science, and the English requirements before this is that they are only required to memorize 360 words. It's not sight words. They're only required to memorize 360 words. So this is part of our challenge. Our challenge is with the limited proficiency. We have to teach them science and English. And so
Dr. Chen, may I comment on that? Actually, when Dr. Balinas and Dr. Macaranas, when we were discussing about this, we were curious because we were thinking, we were pondering, oh, they have a bilingual education program. Because in the Philippines, we don't have a bilingual education program. For example, for our science teachers, pre-service science teachers, we teach them really the content in English for the college level. And I think,
and that's what we're gonna do now. Teach them science in English in a college level for the pre-service teachers.
And I appreciate your effort in your department, in your center, because just like what you mentioned, probably the program is in infancy, and there is this center that would basically take effort to, number one, look into the difficulties of our learners and our pre-service teachers and even our in-service teachers, and just like to address the concerns on reading materials, probably come up with instructional materials, not only for our learners, okay, but even for our pre-service teachers, which is within their level. So I'm excited to know about your initiatives in your center.
Thank you. Yes, it's pretty challenging to go up to speed as to promoting reading and science, and that's definitely we're gonna set our goal after your talk is to promote science reading, reading science text in English. But yeah, there's still a long way to get there. We're promoting science concepts and teaching science concepts using multimodality, as one of our participants, Wang Sihan Lao Shi, has shared. She's using her PowerPoint, all the resources online, and engaging them in different activities and all that. So yeah, we're gonna thank you so much for your talk. We've learned so much from you, and we're gonna promote reading, get our students ready to read more in science and engage more in scientific inquiry. So I guess we need to wrap up the session because we've gone 12 minutes over time.
Sorry
because this
that.
is so interesting, and we're engaging in a lot of discussions here. We've learned a lot. Thank you, Dr. Jarrent, for sharing your expertise in teaching science in English, and I'm certain that participants have gained valuable insights that they can use in their teaching. For the participants, kindly complete the survey that we sent through your email, and we will use this information to design future events that will better serve your needs. So once again, thank you for joining us in today's webinar, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, Dr. John.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Yeah,
Chen, and thank you very much, everyone,
Thank
for
you,
your
Dr. Bolinas, for
participation.
joining. Thank you,
Thank
Dorothy,
you.
for joining us.
Congratulations.
You are all wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, all participants who used your Saturday morning and participating on this webinar. Thank you so much for your time and your interest in this topic. And I'm looking forward to our future partnership and future webinars with Dr. Bolinas, with Dr. Tayag in the Philippines, in Heles University Foundation. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you
Hey,
very
everyone.
much.
Thank
Thank
you, Dr.
you.
Tayag, Dr. Dottie. Bye, Jane. Dr.
Bye.
Jane.
Thank you.
Stay
And
safe
I'd
and
like to thank
well.
Michelle so much for